It was 12:47 a.m. inside the Las Vegas Hilton showroom on March 12, 1973. Elvis paused mid-rehearsal, caught by a tiny shape asleep near the footlights. His daughter, Lisa Marie. The arena went dead silent. He set the mic down and leaned in. What happened next melted a hardened crew and changed a legend's rehearsal forever. Las Vegas had already curled into its neon hush when the Hilton showroom clicked to life like a sleeping beast. 2,000 empty seats stared up at the stage, red velvet absorbing every stray echo. A low tape hiss rode beneath the room's breath as the TCB band warmed through a slow groove. Ronnie Tutt on a brushed shuffle, James Burton picking glassy thirds, Charlie Hodge checking harmonies, Glenn D. Harden vamping a whisper of "Always on My Mind." Over the footlights, dust drifted like glitter. At 12:47 a.m., the board lamp blinked green, and Felton Jarvis lifted a finger from the sound booth. Rolling. Elvis moved the way only the exhausted move. Precise. Careful, saving power for the moment it mattered. The white rehearsal suit was unadorned tonight, no cape, but the room still pulled toward him as if his heartbeat set the dimmers. He tested the top of a line, winced, coughed, then laughed softly into the mic. "One more for the cheap seats," he said, and even the crew on the catwalk smiled. Then he saw it. Just left of the monitor wedge, half tucked behind a speaker case. Something small and pink and very still. He stopped. The band slid to silence. You could hear the mains hum like a sleeping refrigerator. Joe Esposito stepped forward from the wing, ready for a cue that didn't come. Elvis lowered the mic until the cable made a soft rubber sigh on the stage. "Hold it," he said, but not to the band. He angled his body toward the little bundle on the floor and took 2 slow steps that sounded like a metronome on carpet. In the dim spill of the footlights, a child's cheek shone. A tiny hand clutched the edge of a blanket the color of cotton candy. Lisa Marie, asleep at her father's feet. The room changed temperature. It wasn't the thermostat. It was a tension, gathering and holding, as if 2,000 absent people had exhaled at once. Somewhere in the house-left aisle, a stagehand froze mid-coil with a cable loop draped over his arm. Felton's finger hovered above the talkback, but didn't press. Do you remember the first time a job you loved collided with a person you loved more? Do you remember the way your voice tried not to wake what mattered? Elvis knelt. Rhinestones would have flashed here on a show night. Instead, a plain cuff grazed the floor as he slid his rehearsal jacket from the mic stand and draped it, gentle as a prayer, over his daughter's shoulders. The king of rock and roll, whispering like a child. He looked older in that angle, the way fathers look at sleeping children, half guardian, half pilgrim. The overheads hummed. From the booth, a red pencil rolled and dropped, tapping the console with a tiny, echoing tick. "Boss?" Joe asked, voice barely louder than dust. Elvis didn't answer right away. He adjusted the jacket so it wouldn't slip, then checked whether the stage wedge blew air toward her. He turned it a fraction with the side of his boot, a dancer's micro move. For a heartbeat, the Hilton, so famously loud, felt like a church built for one child's rest. He straightened, not fully, just enough to put a palm to his sternum, as if steadying a note before he sang it. "Let's take it from the bridge," he said softly. But he wasn't looking at the band. His eyes were on her. Ronnie counted them in, with sticks he didn't let touch. An invisible 1-2. Elvis lifted the mic again and tested a line under his breath. A fragile ribbon of melody that barely left his lips. "Maybe I didn't treat you." He stopped himself and smiled. "Not now, not loud, not like that. What if the most legendary moments don't need applause at all? What if the most faithful performance is the one no ticket ever bought?" He turned, finally, to the men who had watched him carry coliseums by will. "Easy," he mouthed. "Like a lullaby." Charlie nodded, finding a harmony so thin it might pass for air. The tape kept rolling. The green light held steady. Felton whispered to no one, "Man, listen to that room." The arena went dead silent again, by choice this time, not by command, ready for whatever would follow this tenderness. From above, A catwalk bulb flickered and steadied, like a shoulder being patted by a careful hand. Elvis took one last look at his sleeping child, then back to the microphone, as if aligning two horizons, the stage and the floor, the legend and the father. He breathed in. Somewhere in the dark, a camera clicked. One Polaroid, a white square that would take 60 seconds to bloom. What happened next would live longer than any show that week, and none of them knew the mic was still hot. For a full 10 seconds, nobody breathed. The red light above the booth still glowed, recording. Every whisper in the Hilton felt magnified. Elvis stood between the mic stand and his daughter, the cables forming a halo around them like stage vines. He motioned to the band to stay put. Then, quietly, he said, "She shouldn't be here this late." Joe Esposito hesitated at the edge of the curtains. "You want me to carry her out, he?" Elvis shook his head, his eyes soft but resolute. "No, let her sleep. Let her dream of music, not work." The line was gentle, but it landed like scripture. Charlie Hodge leaned his guitar against the amp, murmuring, "That's the truest thing he's said all night." Someone in the lighting pit wiped at his eyes with a sleeve. The mood had shifted from exhaustion to something sacred, an unplanned quiet faith. The king, surrounded by million-dollar sound gear, whispering over a child's heartbeat. He crouched again, adjusting the mic cord so it wouldn't brush her blanket. The cable hissed softly, feeding into the live tape still rolling. "Y'all know what this means, don't ya?" Elvis said without looking up. "It means no matter how many people we play for, if my little girl's here, she's the audience." That line hit everyone differently. Ronnie Tutt later told a journalist, "We'd rehearsed with him through anger, joy, grief. But that night, it was love rehearsing itself through him." The clock read 1:03 a.m. when Elvis called a short break. He motioned toward the piano. "Play something soft, Glenn. Nothing she can't dream through." Glenn D. Harden's hands drifted into a slow, hushed version of "Can't Help Falling in Love," barely audible. Like a lullaby the world wasn't meant to hear. Half the crew turned away, pretending to fix cables, but everyone's eyes flicked back toward the small pink blanket. The image burned itself into them. Elvis's face softened in the dim blue spill. No spotlight, no choreography, just the kind of stillness that comes before tears. How often do we rush past the quiet moments, the ones that could outlive every standing ovation? Joe finally whispered, "You sure you don't want to call it a night?" Elvis smiled faintly. "If I did, I'd never get to remember this." The words hung in the air like a lyric that would never make it to vinyl. A hush thicker than applause settled across the showroom. The neon outside flickered faintly against the mirrored wall, painting soft waves of gold and blue over the sleeping child and her father. From the booth, Felton Jarvis pressed his headset closer and said, "Man, this ain't rehearsal anymore. This is a prayer." Elvis didn't answer. He just looked down, touched Lisa's tiny hand once, and turned toward the mic again. "Let's make this one for her." The green light blinked. The tape began spinning faster, feeding magnetic ribbon through a reel that would one day outlast them all. And somewhere in the hush, before the first note of the next take, Elvis whispered something so quietly, only the nearest microphone caught it. "Sing for love." Not applause. Nobody realized the line had been recorded. Not yet. But the tape had, and it was still rolling. The next few seconds stretched like silk. No one in the Hilton showroom dared move. The red record bulb burned steady above the booth, throwing a faint glow across the cables snaking over the stage floor. Elvis stayed at the microphone, but he wasn't singing. He was watching Lisa Marie breathe. The band, still holding their instruments, looked to one another, waiting for a cue that never came. Ronnie Tutt tapped his sticks once, a signal to cut all amps. Silence swallowed the room so deeply you could hear the faint whir of the reel machine spinning. Elvis took a step closer to the mic. His voice, low and steady, filled the hollow without music. "You know, one day she's going to ask what I cared about most." The words landed with the soft finality of prayer. Joe Esposito looked up from the wing, his hand frozen mid-air. "I want you all to remember this," Elvis continued. glancing from one face to another. It wasn't the records. It wasn't the shows. It was this, right here. He nodded toward the sleeping child. Charlie Hodge exhaled through his nose, gripping the neck of his guitar a little tighter. A few of the lighting crew dropped their gazes, suddenly blinking too fast. Then, almost as if speaking to himself, Elvis whispered, "If she remembers her daddy singing, I hope it's not the sound. I hope it's the feeling." The room froze. The man who once commanded stadiums with a single note, now whispering a line barely louder than breathing. And somehow, it carried more power than any encore. Felton Jarvis didn't stop the reel. He mouthed to a tech beside him, "Don't cut, just let it run." And so the tape rolled, humming softly as if recording the heartbeat of a family moment. The crew would later say that what filled the air wasn't silence. It was reverence. Because in that instant, the king wasn't a performer. He was a father, trying to hold on to time that was already slipping away. Lisa stirred once, her small hand twitching beneath the jacket draped across her shoulders. Elvis turned immediately, instinctively, a reflex learned not on stage, but in life. He smiled, whispered, "Shh, Angel." That's when the band realized he wasn't just talking to her. He was talking to himself, to the part of him that still wanted to believe the show didn't have to come before everything else. When was the last time we stopped chasing noise long enough to hear what silence is trying to say? He walked back to the mic, placed a hand on the stand and said quietly, "All right, boys, let's give her something worth dreaming to." Ronnie counted in with a tap of the snare, so soft it sounded like a heartbeat. The melody that followed wasn't from the set list. It wasn't even planned. Elvis began humming a tune no one recognized, something half gospel, half lullaby. Glenn D. Hardin joined in on piano, following blindly, no chords written, no tempo marked. The sound was fragile, a thread of love stretched over time itself, and yet for those few minutes it was perfect. No spotlight, no applause, only the gentle hum of a father singing to keep the world still. The tape captured all of it, even the way Elvis's voice cracked near the end, a sound too honest for radio. When the final chord died, Elvis didn't move. The band waited. The tape kept spinning. Then, from somewhere in the dark, Lisa let out a soft sigh and turned over beneath the jacket. Elvis smiled faintly. "Guess that's her approval," he said. Laughter rippled softly through the crew. Short, restrained, grateful. Then Joe Esposito's voice cut through the hush. "The mic's still hot." Elvis looked up, realizing the recorder had caught everything. Every word, every whisper. He paused, then shrugged with a half smile that only a man who's seen both fame and failure could wear. "Good," he said. "Maybe someday she'll hear it." No one realized just how prophetic that line would become, because the reel they were recording that night, the one labeled Hilton Rehearsal, Take 12, would go missing for nearly 30 years. And when it finally resurfaced, it carried the most intimate thing Elvis ever left behind. For weeks, that moment at the Hilton lived only in the crew's memories. Like a secret they carried home in silence. The tour came and went, another year spun by, and the city moved on to brighter marquees. But deep in the Hilton's sound vault, one spool of magnetic tape sat unmarked, half-filled, and quietly waiting. It was found by accident. A young audio tech named Rick Stanley, new to the Hilton staff in 1974, was tasked with cleaning storage shelves. Among boxes labeled Vegas 73 Rehearsal Masters lay one smaller reel, handwritten in fading blue ink. Lisa Track. No date. No label, just those two words. He almost threw it out, but something about that title stopped him. Rick brought it upstairs to Felton Jarvis's office, asking if it should be archived or erased. Felton frowned. "Lisa Track? That ain't one of ours. Let's hear it." They threaded the reel into the Ampex deck. The first seconds were static. Hiss, room tone, distant laughter. Then came a faint voice. "She shouldn't be here this late." Felton's head jerked up. "That's him." he said quietly. A shiver went through the room. They kept listening. You could hear Elvis's footsteps, the murmur of the band, the words that had silenced everyone that night. If she remembers her daddy singing, I hope it's not the sound, it's the feeling. Rick turned slowly, eyes wide. This is real? Felton nodded, whispering, That's no stage patter, son. That's his heart on tape. The world's most recorded man, captured in the one moment he never meant to record. They sat through the full 10 minutes, motionless. At the end came a tiny rustle, Lisa shifting, a faint laugh from Elvis, and then the whisper that would become legend. Sing for love, not applause. When the reel clicked to an end, Felton said nothing. He just rewound it, labeled the box properly, and slid it into his desk drawer. He told Rick, We keep this between us. Some things belong to the people who were there, but secrets have a way of echoing. Years later, after Felton's passing, his desk was cleaned out. Among old demo cassettes and studio notes, the Lisa track reel was found again, untouched, still wound to the beginning. It passed quietly through collectors' hands, never sold, never leaked. In fan circles, rumors whispered of a lost Hilton recording, where Elvis spoke to his daughter mid-song. Most thought it was fiction. Why do the gentlest truths always travel the slowest? As if the world needs time to be ready for them. Then, in the early 2000s, a studio archivist named Marie Cunningham began cataloguing forgotten Hilton sessions for a digital remastering project. On a Friday night in 2002, she loaded the unlabeled reel onto a modern playback deck. When she pressed play, the soft hiss filled her headphones. Then, Elvis's unmistakable drawl, calm and fragile. That's my baby girl. She froze. Tears welled before she even realized it. The recording wasn't perfect. Uneven levels, background hum, muffled laughter. But it didn't need to be. It sounded human. Marie wrote in her notes that night, March 12, 1973, private rehearsal, believed to be final take before midnight, contains intimate speech to daughter. Emotionally devastating. Reel spinning in close-up, background hiss fading into black and white footage of the Hilton stage lights blinking off. Marie contacted Graceland Archives with trembling hands. They confirmed the handwriting on the tape box matched Elvis's. It was no longer rumor. It was history, and yet, for 2 more decades, the world still wouldn't hear it, because inside Graceland's vault, the curators made a choice, to preserve it, but not release it. They believed it was meant for one listener only. What none of them knew was that she would eventually hear it. Nearly 3 decades after that sleepless night in Vegas, the world looked different. Compact discs had replaced vinyl. The Hilton's showroom had been renovated and renamed. But in a quiet corner of Graceland, one tape still waited. Its label, Lisa Track, was fading to grey. Lisa Marie was 35 when the archivist called. She'd been working on her own album, trying to carry the name that felt both blessing and weight. There's something you should hear, Marie Cunningham said softly over the phone. It's your father. They met in the archive room, walls lined with reels like time capsules. The lights were dim to protect the film stock. Marie placed the tape on the deck, hesitated, then pressed play. At first, just hiss, then a faint shuffle of shoes, and a voice, warm, familiar, breaking slightly around the edges. She shouldn't be here this late. Lisa's breath caught. Her eyes widened, not in surprise but recognition, as if memory had been waiting for proof. She leaned closer to the speakers. If she remembers her daddy singing, I hope it's not the sound. It's the feeling. A hand flew to her mouth. The room seemed to tilt, time bent. For a moment she wasn't the grown woman listening to an archive. She was that child in a pink blanket, asleep beneath the lights. Marie glanced over, ready to stop the tape, but Lisa whispered, "Don't. Let it play." The daughter of rock's greatest icon, hearing her father speak to her across 30 years of magnetic ribbon. The real word on. Then came the phrase that froze them both. Sing for love, not applause. Silence followed. Long, weighty, luminous. Tears slipped down Lisa's face, catching the dim light like tiny mirrors. "That's what I tell my kids," she murmured. "I didn't even know he'd said it first." Marie nodded, speechless. In her field notes she later wrote, "Subject wept quietly, requested a copy for private listening only." Lisa didn't release the tape publicly. She carried a small digital transfer with her, loaded onto an old iPod, and sometimes, before a performance, she'd sit backstage, close her eyes, and listen, not for inspiration, for grounding. When the world knows your parent as a legend, how do you hold on to the version that was simply Dad? In interviews years later, when asked about her earliest memory, Lisa never mentioned Graceland's gates or the screaming crowds. She said, "I remember falling asleep near a stage and hearing him hum. I didn't know the words, but I felt safe." That answer rippled through Elvis circles. Crewmen from the old Vegas days wrote letters to Graceland. She remembers it. She really does. And in a way, the circle closed. The tape he never meant anyone to hear had reached its only intended listener. Still, one detail remained unknown. A handwritten note on the back of the tape box. 5 simple words that even Marie hadn't deciphered when she first catalogued it. A few months later, while preparing items for display at the Graceland Annex, Lisa asked to see the original reel. When the archivist handed it to her, the label caught the light just right, and faint pencil lines appeared beneath the ink. She read them once, then again, whispering under her breath, "For her, when she's older." The words blurred through her tears. She pressed the box to her chest and closed her eyes. Outside, tourists queued for photos in front of the mansion gates, unaware that inside, a daughter was finally answering the quiet message her father had left. Close up on tape spinning, cross-fade to vintage Hilton marquee lights flickering out. And just before Lisa left the archive that day, she turned to Marie and said, "Now I understand why he never finished that take. It wasn't meant for the world," she smiled, "small, fragile, grateful. But history has its own way of finishing unfinished songs, because what happened next, years later, would bring that lullaby back to life in front of thousands." It was spring 2005 when the Hilton prepared for its 50th anniversary documentary. Boxes of old concert reels arrived at a Nashville post house, their labels sun-bleached and half-peeled. Among them sat one smaller canister, tape edges warped from age. The technician, Earl McKinney, almost tossed it aside until he saw the faint handwriting. Hilton, Lisa Session 73. He loaded it onto a Studer deck, pressed play, and leaned close. A low hiss, then a heartbeat of silence, followed by Elvis's voice, ghost clear and human. "That's my baby girl." The room went still. Earl called the producer in. The crew gathered around the monitors as the reel played on. Faint hum of lights, shuffling feet, then that same whispered creed. Sing for love, not applause. The legend's forgotten lullaby bleeding through static, fragile as smoke, yet strong enough to stop an entire editing room. When the footage rolled in the documentary later that year, they didn't announce it. No subtitle, no caption, just 10 seconds of tape hiss, and that sentence, tucked between scenes of flashing marquees and crowds. Viewers watching late on cable paused their remotes, rewound, asked, "Did he really say that?" Within weeks, forums lit up. Audio engineers compared spectrograms. Fans uploaded enhanced versions. CNN ran a short headline, "Unreleased Elvis rehearsal resurfaces." But the most powerful reaction came from Graceland itself. Lisa hadn't been told the clip would air. She found out when friends called, crying. Instead of anger, she sent a short message to the producers. "You let the world hear who he was. Thank you." What happens when something private becomes a gift large enough for strangers to feel? The Hilton used the rediscovery to honor the night properly. On March 12th of that year, beneath a plaque etched with his quote, "The house lights dimmed for exactly 1 minute at 12:47 a.m., the same time the tape had rolled 3 decades before. Musicians from the TCB band attended, grey-haired now but still loyal. Ronnie Tutt placed a small pink blanket on the stage edge. Felton Jarvis's old assistant read from a letter Elvis had written that week in '73. "We rehearse because love deserves practice." The audience, about 1-800 people, rose to their feet, not in applause but in silence. Wide shot of darkened showroom, one spotlight on the empty mic stand, faint tape hissed beneath the silence. In that stillness, you could almost imagine him again, kneeling, jacket draped over his sleeping child, voice cracking between verses, the myth and the man overlapping for a heartbeat. When the lights came back up, Lisa stepped forward, eyes shining. She said only one sentence. He never wanted to be perfect, just kind. The room broke into applause then, but gentle, almost embarrassed, as if not to disturb the echo still lingering between the speakers. Back in the control booth, Earl rewound the master and wrote a new label in bold ink. Las Vegas Hilton, March 12th, 1973, for her. And as the tape spun down to silence, the whir of the reels faded into what felt like breathing, the same rhythm that had carried father and daughter through that long night. Yet, tucked beneath the final layer of oxide, one more secret waited, something only visible once the tape began to deteriorate. Because when archivists restored it years later, a faint pencil mark appeared under the leader strip. 5 words that had never been heard aloud, but would soon complete the story forever. It was late 2006, when the Graceland restoration team finally decided to preserve the Hilton, Lisa Session Reel, in digital form. The oxide was flaking, the edges had begun to curl. Archival engineer Calvin Drew placed it under soft light and unspooled the leader by hand, using white gloves and a magnifier. That's when he noticed it. 5 faint pencil marks beneath the label tape. He tilted the reel. The handwriting was careful, familiar, in faded graphite, barely visible against the cardboard. For her. When she's older. Calvin froze. He called his supervisor over, who read it once, twice, and whispered, "That's his writing." After 30 years, the king of rock and roll spoke again, not through sound, but through a sentence small enough to fit inside a palm. Word travelled quickly. Lisa was invited back to Graceland for a private viewing before the reel went into the museum's permanent archive. That morning the air was crisp. Fans stood outside the gates with flowers, unaware of what was unfolding inside. The archive room was quiet, the only sound the slow hum of the temperature regulators. Calvin handed her the reel, now sealed behind glass. The penciled note glimmered faintly under the preservation light. Lisa took a deep breath, tracing the air above the words, but never touching them. "He always wrote fast," she said softly. "But this..." He took his time. Behind her, a small monitor played the cleaned-up audio. Elvis's voice, warm, cracked, alive. "Sing for love, not applause." She smiled through tears. "He knew I'd need that someday." How many of the things our parents leave behind weren't meant to impress us, but to steady us when they're gone? Lisa requested one thing, that the reel be displayed not beside gold records or stage costumes, but in a quiet alcove near the children's wing of Graceland. He'd want it near laughter, she said. On the day it was installed, a small plaque was placed beneath it. Las Vegas Hilton, March 12, 1973. Private rehearsal recording. Rediscovered 2002. Final message discovered 2006. For her, when she's older. During the opening, the original crew members, Joe Esposito, Charlie Hodge, Ronnie Tutt, stood shoulder to shoulder, older now, eyes glistening under the museum lights. Ronnie whispered. He got his encore after all. Outside, as the crowd began their evening tour, a faint hum came from the exhibit's speaker loop. It wasn't a song, just the sound of a microphone warming up, followed by that tender voice once more. She shouldn't be here this late. Visitors paused, realizing they were hearing something unedited, unperformed. just a father watching his daughter sleep. Soft dissolve between the reel's slow spin and a still photo of the 1973 Hilton stage. Empty, one mic at center, jacket draped over the wedge. From that day forward, fans began leaving notes under the display case, folded letters, baby photos, short lines that read, "For mine," when she's older. The staff collected them weekly, storing each in a binder marked "Messages for Lisa." And though she never responded publicly, Lisa often stopped by after closing hours. She'd stand alone in the quiet hall, listening to that 10-second whisper loop, and say softly to herself, "He was right. Love outlasts applause." It wasn't the words that made people cry when they saw the exhibit. It was the silence after, the realization that even legends end up wanting the same thing we all do, to be remembered kindly by the ones who mattered most. Because when the curtain finally falls, it isn't the roar of the crowd that echoes the longest. It's the lullaby we never finish singing. And somewhere, inside that final reel, preserved under glass and light, the tape still turns, carrying a father's promise forward, one rotation at a time. There are thousands of recordings of Elvis Presley, hits, live takes, alternate mixes, but none like the 10 minutes on that tape. It wasn't meant for sale. It wasn't meant for us. It was a love letter that just happened to be caught by a microphone. The Hilton lights are gone now. The stage has changed hands, the velvet seats replaced. But every March, at exactly 12:47 a.m., a faint hum plays through the Graceland exhibit. It's the sound of that reel spinning, a father's heartbeat etched in magnetized dust. And visitors still stop, mid-tour, when they hear his voice whisper, "Sing for love, not applause." That's the secret he left behind. Not about fame, but about purpose. Because the truth is, most of what we do in life will fade. The records scratch, the lights dim, the crowd moves on. But kindness, the way we look at the people who matter, that's the one performance that never ends. The King's final encore wasn't thunderous. It was a whisper, meant for one heart, and somehow it found all of ours. Love is the only sound that survives the static. If this story reminded you that compassion outlives applause, share it with someone who still believes the quiet moments matter most. Because sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that echoes forever.